delighted to invite and welcome our guest for this afternoon to Temple Micah. I've been talking about Diana Butler Bass being with us for several weeks now with growing excitement. So this is my formal introduction. Diana Butler Bass is an award-winning author, popular speaker, and sharing great ideas to change lives in the world. A passion that ranges from informing the public about spiritual trends, challenging conventional narratives about religious practice, entering the fray of social media with spiritual wisdom and smart theology, and writing books to help readers see themselves, their place in history, and God differently. Diana does this with intelligence, joy, and a good dose of humor, leading well-known, and this is great, from her website, comedian John Fugelsang to dub her iconic, and the late Marcus Bork to call her, quote, spontaneous and always surprising. Glennon Doyle says that she has a razor-sharp mind and a mystical heart. Diana Butler Bass holds a doctorate in religious studies from Duke and is the author of 11 books. Her bylines are everywhere in places that Temple Micah readers read her all over the place. She's won many, many, many awards. I direct you to her website to see what a prolific and honored thinker she is. And we at Temple Micah are lucky that Diana has been a regular teacher for our community over many years, and I feel very grateful to count her as a friend, truly. As if to prove her sense of humor, at the end of her bio, it says that she and her husband lived in Alexandria, and we want to welcome her husband here as well, back. Hi, Richard. Live in Alexandria with their dog and their sometimes successful backyard garden. It's more than a delight to again welcome this great scholar, gifted teacher, and religious role model in every way to our Micah community. Diana Butler Bass, she will speak for a while, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. Please use the microphone that is set up, and we'll have questions from the chat that will come through Rabbi Crawley. And for those of you who want to receive her newsletter, The Cottage, we can pass around this. It is so worth reading. It will spiritually nourish you almost as much as coming to worship at Temple Micah. Okay. It's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Oh, one of the things that happened to me today is my newsletter. I write a midweek newsletter that has something to do with religion and culture, religion and politics. And then I write a Sunday newsletter because I am a Christian, and I take the gospel text that's assigned through our book of readings, and I kind of put a different spin on it. And so today when I was writing today's newsletter, I looked up the gospel text, and it is literally one of the worst texts in the whole of the Christian tradition that is used in anti-Semitic ways. And so I sat there and I said, well, this is going to be fun. And that's how my newsletter started today, how I dread the appearance of this particular text because it has been used so badly in Christian history as part of replacement theory. So I was thinking about you before I got here, and you held me to account to interpreting my text differently for my readers this morning. And that is actually one of the things that my friendship with Danny does all the time. Over the years, as we've gotten to be closer, there's rarely a day when he's not in my mind somewhere when I'm going to some of these texts in the New Testament. So thank you for being such a great community. And I really appreciate your friendship through the years. Christian nationalism. I'm almost afraid to put a slide like that on a on a slideshow in the middle of a synagogue. It's like, will lightning strike, you know? And this is not my favorite topic to talk about. And here we are on a gray day with the Super Bowl, which is not like my favorite holiday either, talking about Christian nationalism. But even though it's not my favorite topic to talk about, it certainly is one of the most important topics that we can be talking about right now. I consider it to be important to be here as a Christian talking about Christian nationalism with my Jewish friends. And feel free to ask me any question you need to ask me. Don't hold back on the questions that you want to explore, because I will not be insulted by anything that you can possibly say. And just to frame up this topic, I haven't written specifically on Christian nationalism, except a few articles in my newsletter that have been pretty widely spread this year. But before that, people would not have thought, oh, Diana, she writes about Christian nationalism. Instead, what I have just been doing for the last 25 or so years is following the course of the religious right. Back in the early and mid 90s, I worked part-time for the New York Times syndicate, and they would send me, I was living in California, they would send me to various and sundry events that were being held and hosted by religious right organizations, including I went to the 1996 Republican National Convention, and my job was following Pat Robertson around and Ralph Reed and seeing if those guys would talk to me. I did talk to Phyllis Schlafly and also to, oh gosh, I can't even remember. Ralph Reed did talk to me very briefly. And so I have been doing that work, looking at the most conservative, politicized parts of American evangelicalism for the better part of 3 decades. Not only was I studying this group from afar, but in another part of my life, I worked at an evangelical college. And it was from that evangelical college where I was fired, also in the early mid 90s. Was there any relationship between, between these two events? So I stand here as a person who has studied this for a long time under different names, as the names have changed for the same movement over the course of a couple of decades. And interestingly enough, I'm also a victim of this crew. They got me fired. They tried to ruin my career. The patriarchal nature of these people and their movement had a direct and powerful impact on my own life. So that's why I wanted to just sort of put that out there. I'm not a fan. I'm an academic, and I'm also been on the receiving end of the power and the political sort of manipulations of the religious right for a long time. So that's why it's not my favorite subject to talk about, but it is an important subject. In certain ways, all that I just told you is really important to understand where we're going to go with this. What we now call Christian nationalism is an outgrowth of different forms of conservative Protestant evangelicalism, and I'll do a little bit more explaining these terms in a moment, over a long time. Some of you might remember in the late 70s, Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson started going on television talking about the moral majority. And that was really kind of the first deeply politicized conservative radical movement to make headlines all across the United States. They arose in relationship to their dislike and distrust of Jimmy Carter, who himself was an evangelical. But when Carter was president, they found they did not like his views, especially around race. And as a result of the Justice Department at the time of Jimmy Carter forcing certain kinds of integration policies on white Christian colleges in the South, they became increasingly opposed to democratic politics and anything that was sort of smack of what they believed was interfering with their rights to forward their worldview, and they organized the moral majority. The moral majority morphed into what we called the religious right, And then it eventually becomes the thing that now we shorthand refer to as white Christian nationalism or just Christian nationalism. It's all of a piece. It's a long story, not a short story, despite the fact that the term here, Christian nationalism, is a relatively new term for the media to use. Just this week, my friend, Robbie Jones, some of you may know him. He lives here in DC. He's the director of the Public Religion Research Incorporated. He, along with E.J. Dion at Brookings, released a study on Christian nationalism. I thought that was very convenient of them. They gave me a whole bunch of new charts to be able to deal with. These charts are intended, I think, to be seen a little more up close, so I will read them to you. They challenge my vision. But I'm going to take you through a couple of Robbie's charts because I think they're really good. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about some issues around theology that I really wanted to bring up here in this setting. Robbie and Brookings, PRI and Brookings, they did a major survey to try to figure out who Christian nationalists are and what they believe. And they just finished conducting the survey and processing all the data. It was almost 7,000 respondents, which, as you probably know, is a big survey. It wasn't just 1,000 people. And it was a nationally conducted piece. And what they wanted to try to do was to figure out if they could come up with a working definition of Christian nationalism. And the way that they cut it was by these 5 questions. They identified these 5 things as sort of the primary markers of Christian nationalist belief. 1, the United States government should declare America a Christian nation. I can't even sometimes believe I'm reading this stuff out loud. So that's the first question on their survey. 2, the laws of the United States should be based on Christian values. 3, if the United States moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore. 4, being Christian is an important part of being truly American. And 5, God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. And so they put those 5 propositions out in their survey. And what they got in return were people who answered all 5 of them, yes, 4 out of 5, or whatever 4 out of 5 they would pick, went into another bucket. People who kind of went halfway with these propositions went into a 4th bucket, and then people who rejected all these propositions went in a different bucket. And so this is what they came up with, is that here we have the percentages of people in the United States who agreed completely or at some level with these propositions. The pink slice up there are what they call Christian nationalist adherents. 10% of the survey responders, representing 10% of the population, 10% were people who answered yes to all 5 of those propositions about America being a Christian nation. The 19%, the orange number, are the sympathizers, and those are the people who answered 4 out of 5. Yes. And then you can see that of course is 29% when you add those 2 together. If you go way far over here to the blue part of the circle, it also says 29%. Those are the people who rejected every one of the propositions. So those are the rejectors. So if you add the adherents and sympathizers up, you get 29%. The rejectors are 29%. And then that big green area are people who landed somewhere in the middle. who answered a couple of them yes, and a couple of them no. It's a pretty big number. That is, if you think about 3 out of 10, roughly, Americans being sympathetic or fully on board with Christian nationalism. And you also see part of the divide, because 3 out of 10 Americans completely reject those propositions. And then there's some play in the middle ground. I think that everybody, when Robbie and EJ rolled this out at Brookings, there was kind of a gasp in the audience about the size of these numbers. I'm not going to do all of the things they did in their presentation, because if you want to see every single chart and even watch the hour-long presentation that they did online, you can go to Public Religion Research Incorporated, PRRI, and you can see their whole thing. But I did want to show you a couple different pieces of it that I think are interesting. Again, this is a very teeny tiny little slide, but in the terms of the print. But I wanted to show you how this works in a couple of the questions. So we have the numbers. This is the percentage of the population who agrees with Christian nationalism with these 5 propositions. Well, how does this work out in specifics? The US government should declare America a Christian nation, was one of the questions they asked. When it comes down to all Americans, only, there we go, 10% of Americans all together agreed with that. And then it goes down, somewhat agree, kind of medium disagreement, I'm not sure, and then reject. So you can see that when it comes to all Americans, 50% of us say that the United States government should not declare America a Christian nation. But there's that other 50% who either agree with that strongly, agree with it somewhat, or kind of neutral about the possibility. And beneath that top line where it says all Americans, it lists out adherents, sympathizers, skeptics, those are the medium group, and rejectors. And you can see that the adherents and the sympathizers with the greens really agree with this idea. They want the government to declare America a Christian nation. I don't know if some of you are aware of this, but there have been different bills in specifically different southern states where they've actually tried to do this on a state-by-state basis. North Carolina had one of the first ones, and I understand that North Carolina's come back up to the bat with it, but so is South Carolina, and I believe Mississippi and Alabama have bills prepared for their legislatures to declare their states to be Christian. So those are popular ideas among adherents and sympathizers, and wildly unpopular ideas among all the rest of us. So you can see those blue lines, no agreement there at all. This was, in a sense, the most extreme line where you saw the most polarization in this question. And then again, just another sample question that was from the survey, US laws should be based on Christian values. And you see that in the overall population, less than half of Americans agree with that idea. But then when you get to adherents, sympathizers, skeptics, and rejectors of Christian nationalism, the green people pop really strongly here. They want our legal basis to be, they want our laws to be built on Christian values. And then the blue lines are the people who reject that. Yes, I'm so glad you asked a question, because this.
I'm just going to repeat the question so that folks on Zoom can hear it. The question is about like Christian values and what that means and whether or not that's a, like, I don't know. Is that your question basically? It's about Christian values, expanding on that.
As if there's agreement on what Christian values are. I mean, that by itself seems a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah, this is where one of the questions I think gets very interesting. I'm fascinated that you ask it, just like your hand popped up, because the way people interpret this question seems to make some difference in some of the racial divide that's lower in the survey. There are a surprising number of African Americans who are adherents of Christian nationalism according to these questions. And there was a big discussion at Brookings about this, especially with Jamar Tisby, who was the African-American scholar who was present. And he said, you know, if you ask an African-American, should US laws be based on Christian values, they might well say yes, because their idea about Christian values is the love of neighbor, caring for the weak, the Beatitudes, all these kinds of things. And so you actually said that in your question. That doesn't seem like such a bad thing. And so in a Black church, you would actually be taught that America is not been working out of the values and of Christianity. It's actually been working against those things. And so if you're African American, you might come at this question in a very particular way. If you are white, there's going to be a different way of thinking about what Christian values are. And oddly enough, most white Christian nationalists are the same crew of people who years ago wanted to hang the 10 Commandments in every courtroom and see the 10 Commandments largely as sort of a wooden list of things you can, laws that you can never transgress. They don't see them in the way that people in this room would kind of understand the 10 Commandments. They see them as the thou shalt nots, and so there's this very sort of legalistic approach to Christian values among white Christian nationalists. And oddly enough, the other piece of that they would see as Christian values would be things like wives, submit to your husbands, slaves, obey your masters. There was literally a thing that's been flying around Twitter all week. And there's a very famous white evangelical preacher from California named John MacArthur. And it was just found out that there was some big sex abuse scandal in his giant mega church out in California. And as part of talking about this tape surfaced where he actually is justifying slavery. Slavery wasn't such a bad idea if you had a nice master, and of course Christian values would insist that masters should treat their slaves well. And here's this man who's in his 70s. He's one of those powerful figures in evangelical megachurch circles, literally making an argument for slavery based out of Ephesians, one of the Paul's letters, Ephesians chapter 5. And so that's how a white megachurch pastor would interpret it. So thank you. Yes, there is considerable argument among Christians as to what Christian values mean. And that does show up in this survey. That's kind of what begins to play out on this. Again, tiny little print, but I want you to see it with the colors, which will give you a sense of what's going on here. That top line where there's the most pink, orange, and green, that represents this is Christian nationalists by religion and race. So different religious groups, what percentage of them understand themselves to be Christian nationalists, how they answered the questions. And so among white evangelical Protestants, represented, for example, by John MacArthur, who I was just talking about, Jerry Falwell, the late Jerry Falwell, the now disgraced son, Jerry Falwell, all these people, white Christian nationalists or white evangelical Protestants are that top line. And you can just see they are the dominant religious group that represent adherents of Christian nationalism. White evangelical Protestants, biggest numbers on the board. The second line, and the thing about white evangelical Protestants, they make up about 15 to 18% of the total population. So it's also a fairly sizable group in the population. The next line down is other Protestants of color. And this is a really strange line. They never explained it terribly well at the Brookings thing. I want to go back and look at it again. But it means this particular line where it's mostly mixed race Protestants and Asian American Protestants, oddly enough. But that's a very small group. That's about 2% of the population, but they overwhelmingly find themselves in this adherence or sympathizer categories. And then you move down, the next one is Hispanic Protestants. This has been showing up very strongly, particularly in Texas and Florida in recent elections. For those of you who are sort of political junkies and are watching this, Hispanic Protestants with connections to Latin America still through immigration or recent immigration are tending to vote like white evangelical Protestants. And it seems to be through shared commitments to things like charismatic and Pentecostal forms of Protestantism, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment a little bit more. So here we have white evangelical Protestants. Big group, almost dominates white Christian or Christian nationalism. Other Protestants of color, a smaller group, but very much present in here. Hispanic Protestants make up a lot of the adherents of Christian nationalism. And once you get down past them, you get the Mormons, not surprisingly, highly patriotic sort of group that would have a history that would lean towards saying yes to many of these questions. Black Protestants, this is that interesting thing where Black Protestants answering these questions with such a different lens that they pop in this category. And then other Christians are under Black Protestants. Once you get under other Christian, which include things like Jehovah's Witnesses and all kinds of smaller groups, you begin to see the lines shift more dramatically. White mainline Protestants, white mostly liberal Protestants, this is my tradition, people across the street at the National Cathedral, Episcopalians, UCCs, Presbyterians, Evangelical Lutherans, all those groups, you'll see that there are a lot of people there who don't know what to make of Christian nationalism. You start to see the rejector part grow, and you definitely see the adherent section shrink. And then white Catholics, Hispanic Catholics, who don't like this at all. There's a real divide among Hispanic Protestants and Hispanic Catholics about these ideas. And finally, can you tell me who the 2% of Jews are? Not surprisingly, you all are at the very bottom here, and it says 2% of Jews showed up as adherents to Christian nationalism. I don't get that. Jews for Jesus. There's, oh yeah, that woman down in Florida. Yes, go ahead.
One set of information that isn't in this data is information that relates to church attendance. One, whether
actually it is.
Attendance at church with that.
The most.
So the question is about how the data includes church attendance or not.
Yeah, I don't show every slide because this is obviously Robbie's data and not mine. But the thing that was, I thought, the most shocking piece of data from this entire presentation that they did over Brookings was people with higher levels of church attendance were more likely to be Christian nationalists. And that actually has been, that flies in the face, the data flies in the face of the myth that has been going around the media. Because for a long time, evangelicals who saw this and who didn't want to admit that this was happening in their churches, they were saying things like, oh, those people call themselves evangelicals, but they never go to church. And there is a clear correlation in this data between evangelicals who frequently go to church and their adherence to Christian nationalism. It's almost a complete overlap. That means, of course, they're being taught it in their churches. It's being preached from their pulpits. It's being taught in their Sunday schools. And there was Peter Wehner, who writes for the Atlantic and is involved in different things around in DC, he tried to make the case at the Brookings event. He tried to say, well, this is a failure of teaching. It's a failure, he said, it's a failure of catechesis. Use a Catholic word to talk about Christian formation. And then Robbie pulls out this data point, and it's like, actually, no. Christian nationalism appears to be a success of exactly what is being taught in conservative evangelical churches. I mean, it's deeply problematic. I'm glad you asked that question. Yes.
Yeah, there are also guys like Norm Watsonian, the whole national conservatism movement.
Yes.
American Jew who moved to Israel, but he's very on board with much of what you're describing here.
Oh, thank you for that name. Do you want to go ahead and say that for the folks who are online?
I missed it.
Oh, Yoram Hazoni.
Oh, Yoram Hazoni.
Totally Yoram Hazoni stuff. Yes, yeah.
Thank you very much. This is something I'm less than completely aware of, so I appreciate learning new things. So anyway, this picture is just to show you kind of where the trouble seems to be culturally and religiously, which religious groups are contributing the most towards this. What is fascinating to me is the biggest religious group in America right now is, does anybody know? The nuns, people who are religiously unaffiliated. That's the group at the bottom. The bottom line are people who are religiously unaffiliated. And you will see that the religiously unaffiliated are the people who have the highest number of rejectors of Christian nationalism and the lowest number of adherents of Christian nationalism. Okay, just a couple other things just to show you what's happening here. This one's a little easier to see from a distance. Christian nationalism adherence by race and evangelical identification. The dark pink are people who identify as evangelicals, white, Hispanic, and Black. And you can see that those are all folks who identify as Christian nationalist adherents. And then Christians who are white, Hispanic, and Black, but who are not evangelicals. And there the numbers shrink. So again, the determinative thing seems to be evangelicalism in each one of these different communities. This is just, I think it's interesting. Christian nationalism scale by political affiliation and the news sources people trust. So the top three lines are political parties: Republican, Independent, and Democrat. You can again see it's an evangelical problem. It's also a problem of the Republican Party. Independents, you start getting a lot more people who just don't know what's going on in that middle frame. And Democrats are wildly opposed to Christian nationalism. And then the bottom four lines are the news sources that people primarily depend upon. And so people who most trust what's called far-right news sources, OAN, Newsmax, Steve Bannon's podcast, other sources like that are the most Christian nationalists. The next line down is those who most trust Fox News, kind of 50-50. Then this one is interesting. Do not trust TV news. You start getting more people who are not Christian nationalists, and then most trust of the mainstream news. The bottom two lines are very similar. So those are just fascinating. Okay, so this is the last two that I want to pull up for you. I thought that it was really important that you see this. This is anti-Semitic attitudes among Christian nationalists adherents, and it shows it by race. The gray dot stands for all Americans. The dark red dot stands for white Christian nationalism adherents. And then they break down the dark red dot between all Christian nationalist adherents and non-white Christian nationalist adherents. And what they did is they asked people 4 tropes They put 4 tropes about Judaism in front of the people who took this survey. So please excuse me for reading this. This is how the survey was constructed and how folks responded. The first trope, Jewish people stick together more than other Americans. And the high pinks are all coming from white Christian nationalists. And you can see the separation with the gray dot. It's all other Americans. The second trope, Jewish people are more loyal to Israel than to America. Again, the pink dots sort of all gang up right there, and you see that the gray dot is low and far away. American Christians, this one's really interesting. It sort of contradicts the one above it, but what can you say? American Christians love Israel more than most American Jews do. And they had a bit more of a spread here. The interesting thing about the highest group on that particular thing was non-white Christian nationalists agreed with it more than any other group. And then finally, this one is one that will surprise no one, I'm sure, in this room. Jewish people hold too many positions of power in America. And you see the spread there. And again, the highest response of yes came from non-white Christian nationalists. This one is just for fun because I love talking about patriarchy. This is what stomped all over me at one part in my life. Again, the colors represent the same thing. So this is the view of gender. In a truly Christian family, the husband is the head of the household and his wife submits to his headship. Do you agree or do you agree with this proposition? What's the question? Yep, that's what I say too, Danny. Oh my God. Then the second one is, right, this, so the top one is, in a truly Christian family, the husband is the head of the household and the wife submits to his leadership. And all Americans is the gray dot. And then the pink dots are the same as they were on that last slide. They are white Christian nationalists, non-white Christian nationalists, and all Christian nationalists, or some form of or those dark, medium, and light pink dots. The second one is American society improves when women have more career and educational opportunities. And this question, they were not asked to agree with it, they were asked to disagree with it. And you'll see that 15% of Americans disagree with America improves when women have more career and educational opportunities. So it's a low number, it's that gray dot. And then those numbers rise with the Christian nationalist pink dots right there. The third one is, these days, my husband says, what the heck do you think this question means? But this one they were asked to agree with. These days, society seems to punish men just for acting like men. And you can see that some level of people in the gray did agree with that. But then again, the pinks are all much higher. My husband is like, what does that mean? You know, stuffing hot dogs in your face. I mean, what does this mean? You know, hitting your kids. We don't know what that means. But they people who were pink in these pink dots agreed with that very strongly. And then finally, society as a whole has become too soft and feminine. And a gray dot agreement with all Americans, which is way too high for my taste. It's 38% of people agree with that statement. But then the pink dots are all in the high 60s and low 70%. So you can see that this is really amazing data. And they go through on a whole bunch of different opinion questions, spiritual practice questions like, you know, do you attend church? And they drill into the differences between African-American and white Christian nationalists, trying to get at your question, because these were things that struck them as being odd. Now, this data is really important for us to have because it takes us out of the realm of just sort of saying, this is my, experience of, or anecdotally, we can think that. We actually now have numbers that we can look at, and that people who are in political parties can look at, and that researchers can use in order to shape and understand what's going on in these narratives in our culture a little bit better. But this is the last part I wanted to show you, which is like, I did not collect this data. I know Robbie, I was on his board for 10 years, so I know how PRI works, and I can answer most of the questions with them. But that is really their research. My sort of perspectives on this come from a slightly different angle. I'm really interested in some of the theological part of Christian nationalism. And so where we can conceptualize people according to what religious group they say they belong to in a survey, there's a different way of talking about people's religious identity. And that is things that people think theologically. And there are three groups of people, because I'm a sociologist, not a sociologist, I'm a historian. I don't have the numbers here, but there are three groups of people that seem to contribute most heavily, most substantially to the argument that we're having about Christian nationalism in the public square. And the first two groups are dominionists and Christian Reconstruction folks. Those two groups are Protestant. The top one tends to lean toward charismatic religion, which is the revivalist, speaking in tongues, miraculous kind of revivalism that has been prominent in American culture for about 40 or 50 years now. Most of the people who were on Donald Trump's religious advisory board were Christian dominionists. And Paula White, who you might have seen, she's a major sort of figure in this world. It's also, the dominionists hang around something called the New Apostolic Reformation. And I'm going to turn a slide in a moment and show you a little bit more about the Seven Mountains Mandate. But those are the things that they believe and that they're forwarding. These are folks who tended to believe, for example, that Donald Trump was chosen by God, literally to be basically the king of America. They thought that he was like King Cyrus, and that God was going to use this kind of, this corrupt, ungodly man to set God's people free and to establish the new Israel. That would be the dominionists. And a lot of Christian music, Christian contemporary music, is from the dominionist sort of subculture in evangelicalism. The second group, Christian Reconstruction, these are the brainy Christian nationalists, mostly affiliated with the very, very, very conservative parts of Presbyterianism. Now, anybody here who knows a Presbyterian, do not assume that your Presbyterian friend is a Christian Reconstructionist. There are lots of different kinds of Presbyterians in the United States, and many people who you would be hanging around with are liberal Presbyterians who are like Lutherans or Episcopalians or United Church of Christ, fairly mainstream denominations. But there are these very, very small and highly influential Presbyterian denominations around white evangelicalism. And they're always known as sort of the brains of the outfit. They have been crafting since the 50s, really, a theological schema in which they want to replace the laws of the United States with biblical law. And they have literally formed seminaries. There are entire denominations that are influenced by this. Anybody know about Patrick Henry College out in Loudoun County? Those are Christian Reconstructionists. If you have anybody who's working in your office who went to Patrick Henry College, you might want to ask them some of their opinions about some of these things. Because this whole group here, they literally believe that God has called them to infiltrate the United States government in order to undo democracy. The fellow who founded Christian Reconstruction believes that democracy is the primary heresy of Western society, and that for us to become pure again and to be doing God's will, we have to get rid of democracy and put godly leaders in place. Again, these movements are small, but the intellectual influence of Christian Reconstruction is all outsized. Mike Pence is, I can't say that. What I can say is Mike Pence has hung around with a lot of Christian Reconstructionists, and every great religion reporter in America has tried to figure out what his deeper connections are with this movement, and nobody's been able to quite figure it out. But we do know that he has been associated with people in this movement. Mm-hmm.
I don't understand their concern with the United States, but I thought the whole thing with evangelicals was kingdom of God. We want everyone, Jews to go to Israel, and it's like a universal earthbound Christianity. And I mean, I don't reconcile.
Thank you. That's a great question. Do you want to repeat that one?
Why don't you summarize it?
It's a little difficult to understand why they're paying so much attention to the United States, because isn't evangelicalism got this sort of global scope of wanting to convert the world? I mean, basically, they want to do that. Evangelicals buy into the idea that the United States is the new Israel, and that it is the city set upon the hill, and that once the United States is fully Christian in all of the ways that God intended, it will stand as a beacon before all of the nations, and everyone will look at us and say, we want to be just like that. And so if the United States isn't doing that job, it's impossible to do global evangelism. I know, I'm sorry, it's so confusing, because they take on this idea of Isaiah and the new Israel, and it's appropriation, it's wild appropriation of your best stuff, and I'm really sorry for that. But it's also, they've been doing it for a long time. And so it's intriguing. This third group here, and I'm going to talk about each one of these a little bit more and have you ask lots of questions about them. I'm trying not to get in trouble here. There's a long history of anti-Catholicism in the United States, and I will say at the outset that I do not want to participate in that, and I do not feel that I am by pointing this out to you. I have asked friends of mine who are bishops in the Catholic Church how I should phrase this, and that's what they tell me to say. There is a very radical strain right now of neo-traditionalist Catholicism that is associated with white supremacy in the United States. You may have seen that Tucker Carlson this past week attacked the FBI because the FBI, apparently someone at the FBI had a page up on the FBI's sort of, these are the domestic terrorists we're watching out for. Someone at the FBI put this up on their public facing page, that they were looking at these ultra traditionalist Catholic groups. And Tucker Carlson saw that, and he did an entire segment on how the government is coming after your Latin mass. And it really caused kind of a uproar. And apparently the FBI took this down, but it is really there. And so that, the reason I put it up and I mention it is it would be far easier to not mention it because it's not one of the biggest groups. Protestants still constitute the largest percentage of people who are Christian nationalists, but it just so happens that there are some very traditionalist Catholics in some very important parts of the United States government right now, including the Supreme Court. And so this was a controversy when Amy Coney Barrett came before the Congress, and there were people who wanted to ask her about her religious views. And then those people got called out for being anti-Catholic, when what they were really trying to figure out was how she was related to these kinds of movements. And so let me just show you quickly a little bit more about this, and then question. Dominionism is, as I mentioned a moment ago, out of the Pentecostal and charismatic strain of American evangelicalism. These are the people who believe in miracles. These are the people who speak in tongues. These are the people whose revivals you see on television, and there's a lot of ecstatic religious practice. Here we have a really interesting, there are these huge revivals of this kind of religion that have taken place over the last 40 years. And this has been one of the most globally powerful forms of American evangelicalism, particularly in Latin America and Africa. They have sent huge numbers of missionaries to Africa and to Latin and South America, and gotten enormous numbers of converts. And it's a lot of this sort of north-south traffic with Hispanic Protestantism. Right now, for example, tons of Hispanic Protestants were supporting Bolsonaro. And so literally there was in Brazil this incredibly strong faction of Hispanic evangelicals, mostly in this theology, who were the people who did the insurrection that was just down there, just like here, except all in Latin America, in South America. So there's a lot of traffic between these two things. Texas seems to be kind of a boiling point for this in the United States. I talk quite a bit to people in Texas who are Hispanic leaders who are opposed to Christian nationalism, and they talk about that they're like living in just a stew of this, and they're working to try to get their congregations out of it, but there's also a lot of pressure for people to be participating in it. And this is what the 7 mountains are, in case you ever hear anybody talk about this, is that these charismatics believe, based on, I know a lot of goofy things, Revelation 17:9, which is a verse about how the whore of Babylon is sitting atop 7 mountains outside of the great city of Rome. And from there, she is corrupting the world. Of course, it's always a woman. And what the text is this hyper-apocalyptic text about how the people of God are going to cast down the whore of Babylon from the 7 mountains and take the 7 mountains back over. And these are the 7 mountains, according to our charismatic friends: economy, government, family, religion, media, education, and the arts. And so right now, they believe that each one of these areas is basically controlled by the devil and all of his minions, the whore of Babylon, and that they are called to war, be Christian warriors, against the leaders in all of these areas, casting down the powers who currently are at the top of these mountains and replacing them with Christians. Those are the people who were sitting in Donald Trump's office for 4 years, teaching him theology. Christian Reconstruction, the brainy ones, the very conservative Presbyterians, this is what they believe in, what they call theonomy, and they want to replace the United States Constitution with biblical law. And I am not kidding. They want things like homosexuals executed. They have called for incalcitrant sons to get the death penalty. Women who commit adultery, every one of those things that are in the law. Yeah, basically it's like a sort of what they think is a Levitical Sharia law, which is like this. I know, I hate saying all of this, but this is what they talk about. And they also are very strict in terms of their hierarchies. Is that part of the problem with America right now is that the order of God's creation has been disrupted. And so what has to happen, of course, is that men have to be restored to their rightful place at the top of a hierarchy, women, children, etc. And some of them want to reintroduce slavery. Of course they do. It's in the Bible, right? It's in the Bible. Yeah, torture is absolutely fine. I mean, there's entire textbooks. There's a huge tradition of this. My best friend has written one of the primary books on this. If you're brave and interested in that, her book is called Building God's Kingdom. Her name is Julie Ingersoll. It was published by Oxford University Press, so it's not a screed. It's a real academic book. And Julie has spent 30 years studying theonomy and Christian Reconstruction. Their most interesting project politically is to destroy public education and to take education and put that back in the hands of godly patriarchs. And then this one gets you a little bit more. This is ironic to me, is that evangelicals are the ones who want to do global mission, but it's these hyper-traditionalist Catholics who envision a neo-Christendom that will spread across the world with the Pope on the top. They've had a bit of a problem in recent years because Pope Francis isn't up for this. And so within Catholicism, this hyper-traditionalist Catholicism, there's actually been developing, if any of you have Catholic friends, you might have heard about this, there's actually kind of a war within American Catholicism right now. Well, at least there was until Benedict died, because there were a group of American Catholics who were absolutely convinced that Benedict was still the Pope. And he's like this really conservative guy, Nazi-like guy. And so they thought he was really still the Pope and that Francis was holding him captive in the basement of the Vatican as a prisoner, and that Francis is the false Pope and that Benedict was the true Pope, and that the soldiers of Christ would rise up, get rid of Francis and restore Benedict to the papal throne. And so there are Catholics who actually believe right now that the papal throne is empty because it's a false and anti-Pope. That Francis, who's there, because Francis isn't aboard for their game plan. There is a whole bunch of stuff where there is actual crossover between the, I'm sorry about the picture, but that is actually one of the things that's happening. There is literally a crossover between these particular Catholics and the symbols of white Christian nationalist rallies. You can see that they're borrowing medieval Catholic crusader symbolism, ideals. They have reconstituted this form of what they call the Knights Templar, which is a lot more than medieval cosplaying. It is actually a desire to create a warrior class of knights in the Catholic Church who will go out and do this work. And so those are the three big theological kinds of voices that are in the mix of Christian nationalism. And just so that you can relax for a minute, I just want you to have that slide. There are a lot of Christians who are really angry and really worried about this, and we are fighting it with all of our might. So I'm going to put that slide up, but I'll flip back to any other slides that you want me to talk about. Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah, I think, are we starting formal
yeah.
Q&A right now? Or is there more presentation?
No, that's it.
Okay, so I'm going to ask if folks who have questions go back to the mic so that I don't have to repeat your questions over. And we'll take Noel's question and then we'll hand it off to some of the over 105 screens, which is more people that are joining online. So we can give a wave to the folks online.
Thank you so much. Lot to chew on and worry about. I was just wondering where Opus Dei fits into this
Yeah.
neo-traditional Catholicism, ultra-traditional.
Yeah, Opus Dei, in the same way that evangelicalism has been growing politicized in the last several decades, so this whole idea of this ultra-traditionalist Catholicism has also been growing at the same time. And oftentimes these two movements kind of crossed and adopted the same kinds of political agendas. For example, there's cross-pollination around abortion and pro-life. And so this is a place where the evangelicals and the very conservative Catholics met up, and they began to talk about some of these ideas and influence each other in terms of their views of government and their hopes to re-Christianize. I mean, the big worry here is that the whole Western world, there's a decline of Christianity. And a lot of people who really value the Christian heritage of the West, there's various feelings about that among Christians. There are some Christians who are my friends who are very liberal, who say, well, we deserve it because we didn't steward it well. There are other people who say, I'm kind of sad about it. I wish my kids went to church. And then there are these people who feel like it's such an erosion of identity and meaning and mission and purpose that the loss of Christianity will actually undermine the whole of the West, and that it will so weaken the West that will turn toward other sources of moral formation. And they're worried about Muslims, of course, in that way, and communism primarily. And they will do anything they can to stop it. And so Opus Dei is one of those kinds of movements that started developing a while ago, but has folded into a much larger argument within contemporary Catholicism. And Opus Dei is global too. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're going to take from the chat.
Okay.
This is Miriam's question. How do the intellectual white nationalists explain ideas that seem so wildly contradictory to us? Example, Donald Trump's behavior isn't repudiated, et cetera. And I'll add a part B to that question, combining some others, which is, how do these groups play with each other? Like, how do they talk to each other? How do they relate to each other?
Both of those are good questions. One of the most common thing about Trump was the idea that God could use Balaam's ass to accomplish God's will. And so, in effect, they recognized that Trump was an imperfect vehicle and that he did not live up to the moral standards that they themselves set up. But, the question is, some of them do. I mean, some of them apparently do not. So they saw that God could use anyone to accomplish, getting rid of the liberals, clearing the decks, starting a new conversation about what American and Christian identity meant. So that's basically what they do with Trump. Yes.
Orthodox Jewish Israeli nationalists use the same mechanism to describe taking over the entire land of Israel. In other words, that a secular, non-observant Israeli army can carry out, they're also working on God's plan. So the ability of the Orthodox or the fundamentalist on either side, they have a huge ability to rationalize anything as long as it moves the needle in their direction.
Yeah, it's the exact same mentality. The second part of that question was, do these groups play well together? There is one person who is trying to ensure they do play well together, and his name is Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon's podcast is the focal point where these groups all meet. And not only these groups that I have here, and the only reason I list these three is because these are the ones that are most active in the United States, ones that you will have clear familiarity with. I could give specific examples: Patrick Henry College, Amy Coney Barrett, Donald Trump's cabinet, all those things. And so you know what those are. There is a fourth player in this, and his name is Putin. And he believes that the other part of Christendom, which isn't on my list up here, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, is primarily a Russian, or should be headed by the Russian Orthodox Church. That Russia is the true center of Orthodoxy. And the religious argument that is going on in that war in Ukraine is absolutely central to understanding what's happening out there. And so Putin is literally trying to bring Ukraine back under the sphere of Moscow-based Russian Orthodoxy. There's also a big argument that's happening right now in Africa between Constantinople-based Orthodoxy, which is now mostly out of Greece, and Moscow-based Orthodoxy, which is actually fighting for control of resources in several African nations. And so Africa is sort of on a fault line here with religion as well. And so Steve Bannon brings together on a regular basis Putin, Muscovite Orthodoxy, ultra-traditionalist Roman Catholicism, which Steve Bannon actually is, and American right-wing evangelicalism. And sadly, the answer is they play well together. And I don't see the cracks yet between them.
We'll have these two be the last questions.
Okay.
Well, the person on Zoom asked the question that I came up to ask you, which is about how Trump related, despite his immoral behavior related to these groups. I guess I would love to know if you have hope for these groups in any way weakening. Yeah, I'm looking for some hope.
Yeah, well, that was part of I wanted to give you the refresher slide at the end. One of my places of hope is here. There are a lot of us who are in this community or in these communities who see these dangers, and people who are risking a lot to reveal these things and to try to push back on all these things. You know, I told the story about myself 30 years ago getting fired from a job. And I would later find out that the people who were behind the firing was a gigantic religious right funder in Southern California that wanted me out of the way because I was having too much influence in a college where I was teaching. And so there's a lot of risk. I suspect that one of the people who is most publicly risking right now would be a young, I guess she's not that young, middle-aged, professor at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan, by the name of Kristen Kobes-Dumez, who's written a big book called Jesus and John Wayne, which sort of pulls back the curtain on the violence of patriarchy within white evangelical Protestantism. And she's both everywhere right now. You'll probably see her on the news anytime this week. She's constantly on the news, and she's doing lectures all around the world. But at the same time, she could lose her job. Her family has gotten threats. All of us who talk about this regularly receive some level of threat. And so there are people who are really out here doing that work, and we're trying. We're giving it our all. So when I'm around those friends, I have a surprising amount of hope. And yet there's a lot of realism among those people as well. I was recently talking to one person who thinks we've actually crossed what he calls the authoritarian border. And that that there basically is no going back right now, that we're going to have to go through this. My optimism comes from the fact that we will be going through it together. So I'm not going to give up, and I will be standing shoulder to shoulder with everyone else who is fighting this until we have nothing left to fight with. So in that sense, we're together. And you can ask Danny. He'll tell you some of the conversations we've had about this. So yes.
Yeah, I struggle with this question a little bit, so I ask your indulgence.
Oh, please.
But what I really appreciate the statistics and the taxonomy that you provided, but I wanted to talk to you about stories and storytelling. And I should say I'm a recovering journalist. I used to be a big believer in story, and I'm not so much anymore. But as prelude to the question, we seem to be living in a golden age of storytelling, right? There's just no end to the stories that are available. Hulu, YouTube, Netflix. Politics is all about controlling the narrative. Candidates need stories to tell more than they need policies to promote. Businesses and brands have story. Narrative therapy is about retelling the story of your life and so forth. We're told people are hardwired for story. It's what makes us human. It's how we create meaning. And clearly Jews and Christians are story-based traditions, right? Passover and Easter were without doubt two of the greatest stories ever told. Christian nationalism, whatever you say about it,
it's a story.
Is a story. It has a beginning.
Powerful story.
It's a powerful story. It has a beginning and a middle and a hope for ending. My worry is that democracy is a terrible story. It has a great beginning and we exist in this middle, but it's designed as an infinite game. It's designed as a story that has no end. We're just going to be, I always think about it as secular Talmudism. It's a conversation that is supposed to go on indefinitely. You win one round, but you come back and you do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So what I worry about is what's the story that can be a compelling alternative to Christian nationalism? As a story, not a set of ideas or a set of policies, but what's the story that we tell in response to a Christian nationalism story that touches all the hardwired love of narrative that we have? Because to me, that's part of what the nerve that this strikes.
I think that we would be friends if we were spend more time together, because that's actually where my passion is, around storytelling. Part of the argument within Christianity is about this story of Christian nationalism, but it's based on a sort of a deeper storied conflict within Christianity itself. And that is Christianity has been told so often as a story of basically God's violence toward God's son in order to save the world. And so that's how many of my people have told the story of the cross over time. And if you base an entire religion tradition around a story where God saves people by killing them, you're going to wind up on the other side of that with an incredibly violent religious tradition that thinks it's okay to kill anybody who gets in the way of what they perceive salvation to be. Now, that story has been seen increasingly not only inadequate, but increasingly wrong by a good number of Christian theologians over the last century. And there is deep work that is being done to tell a different story. You will never catch me ever telling that story about that violent God who kills and tortures his own son in order to save the world. As a matter of fact, that gives me the willies to even say that other Christians believe that. My understanding of those same narratives from the Gospels, those same narratives from Paul that they used to support that story, I understand to be a story about a God who sets a table in the wilderness. And that since the very beginning, God has had on God's heart the enlargement of that table. More people around that table, more food, provision, grace, the whole story of the gifts of God for all of God's people, in which we sit in joy together forever. A community of eternal peace, joy, and justice. And so that story is a theological story that a whole bunch of us are pressing into very deeply. Martin Luther King Jr. as a minister, he pressed into that story very deeply. And we're trying to get rid of the other story. And so that story work is probably invisible to my Jewish friends, because that's an in-house argument about the story we tell, but we're having that argument. You can see me get beat up on Twitter any day of the week about that argument because I'm so loud about it. And so that's one of the kinds of places where I see hope, is this this taking of the material of the stories that have been used for corruption, violence, and ill, and saying, as a Christian, I'm saying, yeah, that was really awful that that story got assembled in that way. And so we're getting rid of that story, but we're keeping the pieces, and we're asking, where is love, justice, and joy? And to put that story together. So that's one of the ways that it's working out. Another way that it's working out is to think about the other kinds of images we can use for storytelling around democracy. So I just told a theological story.
Right.
I was just in Alabama. I can't actually say, it was a great trip because I went to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, also known as the Lynching Museum. Everyone in America should go. It tells a different story, and it actually tells a story through lynching of hope. You walk out of that place and you are transformed into a person who believes that we can make a different world. And after I did that part of the what wound up being a pilgrimage, I didn't know I was on a pilgrimage. I got the people who were taking me around Alabama to drive me over to the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, which is about an hour away. And I had them drop me off at the base of the bridge, and they drove on the other side, and I walked over that bridge all by myself. What was interesting is I got to the top of the bridge, and I didn't write this yet because it was so powerful. I had this powerful urge. I had this powerful feeling of evil. And I don't know if it's just because I've seen those pictures my whole life or what it was, but I got to the top of the bridge and I had this powerful feeling of evil, and I almost thought I was going to jump off the bridge. I mean, I was that, it was that disturbing. And I went, okay, just head down, Diana, and keep walking. And I just kept walking, and I was walking really fast. And I got to this point where then I saw the people and my friends on the other side of the bridge, and I almost ran across the bridge to give them a hug. But isn't that a vision of democracy? What if democracy is a table with endless numbers of chairs? Or what if democracy is seeing your friends on the other side of the bridge, not jumping off halfway, but just going the whole distance? And so those are ways of telling those stories that I think could be more profitable. And it isn't just, we got to keep at it forever, because it's never going to come. You can get across the bridge, and you can have an enormous amount of people around the table. And so that's what I'm working on in my work. I hope that encourages you.
Wow. Standing ovation.
Oh,
Yes,
oh, thank you.
You are invited to come back here and be with us and pray with us and teach us. Just thank you. Just thank you.